Hello, America. This is Joseph Williams for Almost Daily Views from the Border. And at this moment, there are 4 million cases of coronavirus confirmed around the world. And almost 300,000 lost their lives to it. And here in the U.S., we're at 1,379,756 at this time, with 83,000 deaths. And every one of those, our hearts sink for the families. And we just send our condolences to them all. And it's hard. It's very hard. And the right words to say, there aren't any. But we just got to keep doing our part, right? Please wear your mask. If you have them, if you don't, get them. Make sure we sanitize. Make sure we're doing our part in order to try to keep this from spreading. Because this is the only thing that we can do. And with the closing of all the businesses and shutting down the economy, so that we can shelter in place so as to keep it from spreading. It's really a sight that you just never thought you'd see in our lifetime, We've had some very difficult times in this country, and this is not one of them that we've ever thought we'll have to see. But like all things, America's got to open up, right? That's what the president says. And a lot of people think that we're opening up too soon. With the plunging of the stock market, President Trump's main drive is the economy. And he wants to make sure that the economy comes back, roaring up and everything. And there's a lot to take in with that. Yes, everybody wants to go back to work. Everybody, it's what we do. We get up, we go to work, we do our part for the world, we get compensated for it, and we take it and do what's best for our personal issues, our personal concerns, for our families, to make life better for us. And that's the most important thing, right? So opening up America again. Guidelines. These things, well, I won't say mandates, because the president doesn't mandate pretty much anything, right? They're all suggestions. All suggestions so as to help us to open up the country. But unfortunately, as we know, many of the guidelines that he set forth, a lot of the states haven't met their burden to make sure that they're moving in the right directions to make these things relevant to us, to make it show that we're making progress, that that we're moving in the right direction. Because everybody's got to remember and realize that if we do not do what we have to do to stop the spread of this disease, getting us together before we can do that will just blow everything up. And it doesn't help that he was out there telling people to, get out there and protest and support them when people started getting angst. They end the shutdown, But before it's necessary, before we can actually do something, before it can, benefit us, demanding states to reopen. The governors are doing the best they can in order to make sure that we're being helped, that we are going to be healthy at the end of this. What's the sense in reopening the country if we're not ready for it? But I remember when Jake Tapper on CNN said, he asked the president, "What's your plan?" And that was like, really, that's a really good question. What is the plan going forward in America, Because, are you really doing something in regards to a plan? Because many people, look at him and they think that he's just doing things out of, knee-jerk reaction. Because you would think that the United States has a plan for everything, and they really much do, because there is a national strategy for pandemic influenza. an implementation plan. And this was set out by the Homeland Security Council back in May of 2006, And in the chapters, they described the U.S. government planning and response, international efforts in transportation and borders, protecting human health, protecting animal health, law enforcement, public safety and security, institutional considerations. The implementation plan represents a comprehensive effort by the federal government to identify the critical steps that must be taken immediately and over the coming months, years, to address the threat of the influenza pandemic. And it assigns specific responsibilities to departments and agencies across the federal government and includes measures of progress and timelines for implementation to ensure that we meet our preparedness objectives. Now, that's pretty straightforward, right? And then under the federal government response to a pandemic, it basically says the goal of the federal government response to a pandemic are: 1, stop, slow, or otherwise limit the spread of the pandemic to the United States. Limit the domestic spread of a pandemic and mitigate disease, suffering, and death. And 3, sustain an infrastructure and mitigate impact to the economy and the functioning of society. Now, that pretty much sees that there is a direction, right? A direction to follow so that when the game needs to start, everybody knows that they have a place in it. And you got to wonder, are they following a plan, right? Are they doing it? Does it seem like that everything is so haphazard, that there's no fluid frame of thinking, right? And it goes on to say that the center of gravity of the pandemic response, however, will be in the communities. The distributed nature of a pandemic, as well as the sheer burden of disease across the nation over a period of months or longer, means that the federal government support to any particular state, tribal, nation, or community will be limited in comparison to the aid it mobilizes for disasters such as earthquakes, hurricanes, which strike a more confined geographic area over a shorter period of time. And local communities will have to address the medical and non-medical effects of the pandemic with available resources. Now, this means that it is essential for communities, tribes, states, regions to have a plan in place to support the full spectrum of their needs over the course of weeks or months, and for the federal government to provide clear guidance on the manner in which these need to be met. Clear guidance. Not ambiguous terminologies or, well, they could or so forth, but the federal government is to provide clear guidance on the matter in which these needs need to be met. Now, many of you may have seen these preparedness things because each and every company or each and every state, you've seen the signs on the billboards that says, are you prepared for a disaster? Are you ready? How do you do this? Do you have a plan at home in case of disaster? You saw the ads. And this is supposed to incorporate everybody, right? Everybody is involved. Now, in doing all of this, there is a plan in place. The U.S. government has a plan, and it's called the National Response Framework, okay? Initiated back in 2008. Continued. They did revisions in 2013, 2016, and again in 2019. Now, in 2008, the federal states that when an incident occurs that exceeds or is anticipated to exceed local and state resources, or when an incident is managed by federal departments or agencies acting under their own authorities, the federal government uses the framework to involve all necessary department and agency capabilities, organize the federal response, and ensure coordination with response partners. Now, the federal government's response structure is scalable and flexible, adaptable, specifically to the nature and scope of a given incident. The federal government has strengthened its capabilities to act in emergencies and to do so more quickly and comprehensively based on lessons learned from incidents that's happened in the past. Now, private sector and NGOs, non-government agencies, right? They have a part. It says, in the private sector organizations play a key role before, during, and after an incident. First, they must provide for the welfare and protection of their employees in the workplace. In addition, emergency managers must work seamlessly with businesses that provide water, power, communication networks, transportation, medical care, security, and numerous other services upon which both response and recovery are particularly dependent. And there's a place. Everyone has a part. And if you remember in your corporate companies, when they were asked, do you have a plan? You've seen the diagrams on the walls in all the businesses about where to go in case of an emergency. Where do you relocate if you have to evacuate a building? Many businesses have fire drills, what to do, so that you know where to go when these things happen. So there are responsibilities that all of us have to do in response. But what is very important to understand is that the federal government says, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is going to be our part. And like in all things, you have your part to do. And it continues with the second edition in 2013. Federal government. The president leads the federal government response effort to ensure that the necessary resources are applied quickly and efficiently. Okay, quickly and efficiently. Continuity in those duties, right? Continues on, carries on to the next one. Okay. It just shows that the federal government had the mindset and to make sure that they're doing their part to ensure our safety and security. And private sector entities, private sector organizations contribute to response efforts through partnerships with each level of government. They play key roles before, during, and after incidences. Private sector entities include large, medium, and small business and commerce, private cultural, educational institutions and industry, as well as public-private partnerships that has been established specifically for emergency management purposes. Private sector organizations may play any of the roles described in the following table, and they break it down. Now, during the incident, key private sector partners should have a direct link to emergency managers and in some cases be involved in the decision-making process. Strong integration into response efforts can offer many benefits to both the public and private sectors. All right, so earthquakes that'll happen or a hurricane that can take place. We've had those issues. The city may call on people, businesses, buses, transit things, so that to help move people, or construction companies to help with the removal of debris. You've seen the trucks that come in, that after a hurricane and knocks down trees and everything. Armies of the people that work in the trees, they're cutting down so that things can get moved, And in 2016, framework update again, but it's still consistent, all right? The federal government maintains a wider range of capabilities and resources that may be required to deal with domestic incidents in order to save lives and protect property and the environment while ensuring, of private civil rights and civil liberties. To be successful, any approach to delivery of response capabilities will require an all-of-nation approach. All federal departments and agencies must cooperate with one another and with local, state, tribal, territorial, and insular area governments, community members, and the private sector to maximize to the maximum extent possible. Everyone needs to be on the playing field to make sure that we take care of what's wrong with the world. If the United States get hit, it's an all on deck approach. Okay? So now, even with the private sector entities, private sector organizations contribute to response efforts through partnerships with each level of government. They play key roles before, during, and after incidents. And again, private sector entities includes large, medium businesses, right? During the incident, key private sector partnerships still consistent, right? 2016 still consistent. Everyone has a part to share in this whole thing. The continuity of this from these three plans over the course of the years shows that America is going to be working together to make sure that we take care of our own together. Everything. Transit, electrical, water, FEMA, right? Because even in the cities and towns that we live in, the Department of Public Works can't do it all. They help to maintain, but when crisis hits, it is an all-on-deck approach. From government to businesses, infrastructures, everyone has to work together to get us out of this so that we can survive. Now, this here, in light of what we got going on today, this is the coveted playbook, all right? Playbook for early response to high consequence emerging infectious disease threats and biological incidents. There is a plan. Yes, Mr. Tapper, there has always been a plan. And this here is pretty much the grid for which these plans will be executed. Now, like everything we have is a tier, right? We have targets or incidents that marks an event for which we take action on. Now, it's pretty much simple. Like I said, this is just a playbook, all right? But for each incident that takes place, there is an action for questions that we ask to order to move things. Now, if you look on here, it states that 1A, normal operation, is everyday life, right? And then this is all during phase 1, which is preliminary pre-incident, right? We got 1B, elevated threat. This here, triggering events, identification of a human case of a high consequence emerging infectious disease anywhere. Key epidemiologic indicators, identification of a human case of a pathogen of pandemic potential. 1C, credible threat. A confirmation of multiple human cases of a PPP anywhere. Determination of a significant potential for a public health emergency, which is a triggering event. And then the epidemiologic indicators, a confirmation of multiple human cases. Now, after this, anything that happens after this goes into what's called phase 2, which begins upon notification when after an incident occurs. So we got 2A. Initial response activation, situational assessment and movement, triggering event, demonstration of efficient and sustained human-to-human transmission of a novel virus anywhere, and or declaration of a public health emergency. The key epidemiological indicators, demonstration of an efficient and sustained human-to-human transmission. Now it continues. 2B, employment of resources and stabilization, increasing number of cases in the U.S. or healthcare system burden that exceeds state resources. And then state and local requests for assistance, which is the triggering event. And then next, 2C is the intermediate operation, triggering event. Cases continue to climb with long-term service disruption and critical infrastructure impacts. and or presidential Stafford Act declaration and or state local requests for assistance. So there are guidelines. There is a plan. There is a grid that has targets and action triggers for actions to take place so that it can move forward, right? So this is what was there. This is what's available. What was available, and it's just amazing that the thought that went into this to make sure that moving forward, any administration. Now, this was placed during the Obama administration, and the game plan was set. Okay, and the criteria of everything that you can think of to question how to handle this situation. Now, the first part of the chapter playbook is for international and domestic emerging infectious direct threats, right? And with this, we have questions at every level. All right? So, one question. Once we've reached 1B after the situation happens, there's a question to ask. What are the disease characteristics, severity, and potential? Right? The epidemiologic analysis and country context is important to gauge the severity of the outbreak, host country capacity to respond, and whether there are known evidence-based public health interventions. Now, this is, like I said, international. This is in an effort to keep things away from the U.S. And a lot of the things that we respond to happens in other countries for the sheer reason is that so that it does not come here. This is what this playbook helps us to determine how we can handle the situation. It asks the questions so that you can get the answers. And it's there. The playbook is there. And you got to wonder, could this have been the resources that was needed now in order to help us in this situation that we're in right now? Could this be the shield that we could have had to help us deal with this invisible enemy, as they always say, right? That's what he likes to say. We're at war. This is the invisible enemy. Well, I think this playbook basically gave us the right tool to find the right equipment to do the job right. And I got to tell you, in reading this, and I hope you read it too, the questions that it asks really targets the approach. It really ensures that we are focused. There's no deviation. We have the ability to take care of this situation. Now, in 2017, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, had this national security strategy for the United States of America, right? And in his 4 pillars, in order to make America great, he outlines in the first pillar in protecting the American people, the homeland, and the American way. And he says it here: we will defend our country, protect our communities, and put the safety of the American people first. That's what he said in his July 2017 discourse. And under the heading of combat biothreats and pandemics, it states, biological incidents have the potential to cause catastrophic loss of life. Biological threats to the U.S. homeland, whether as a result of deliberate attack, accident, or a natural outbreak, are growing and require actions to address them at their source. Naturally, emergency outbreaks of viruses such as Ebola and SARS, as well as the deliberate 2001 anthrax attacks in the United States, demonstrate the impact of biological threats on a national security by taking lives, generating economic losses, and contributing to the loss of confidence in government institutions. Advancements in life sciences that benefit our health, economy, and society also open up new avenues to actors who want to cause harm. Dedicated state actors are likely to develop more advanced bioweapons, and these capabilities may become available to malicious non-state actors as well. Priority actions: we are to detect and contain biothreats at their source. We will work with other countries to detect and mitigate outbreaks early to prevent the spread of disease. We will encourage other countries to invest in basic healthcare systems and to strengthen global health security across the intersection of human and animal health to prevent infectious disease outbreaks. And we will work with partners to ensure that laboratories that handle dangerous pathogens have in place safety and security measures. Support biomedical innovations. We will protect and support advancements in biomedical innovations by strengthening the intellectual property system that is the foundation of the biomedical industry. Improve emergency response at home. We will strengthen our emergency response and unified coordinating systems to rapidly characterize outbreaks, implement public health containment measures to limit the spread of disease, and provide surge medical care, including life-saving treatments. Now, for the most part, that sounds pretty good, right? But there is just one part I just want to go and just look back at. Because there is the one line here that really gives you a little bit cause. Because it states here, naturally emerging outbreaks of viruses such as Ebola and SARS, as well as the deliberate 2001 anthrax attacks in the United States, demonstrate the impact of biological threats on national security by taking lives, generating economic losses, and, this is the part, contributing to a loss of confidence in the government institutions. That line there is very telling because there's a hidden message in that. And this is something that Trump has been doing all the time while he's been in office, is to keep the erosion of government institutions, to show that the government does not work. Okay? Everything else seems pretty much on key, right? Because we're going to do the best we can to save the Americas, to save its people, putting America first. But yeah, just so that you know, we're losing faith in the government, so we're going to have to look at other things in order to make things right. So, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to look at the timeline of how this whole pandemic thing went through. And what I've used was the New York Times had a nice timeline, and it looks a little bit detailed. And I also used, and I didn't just use one now, because I just wanted to see exactly how much information these timelines have. And then I went to MSNBC, because they also have a timeline on how things went. And to show that I'm including for everyone, I even used a timeline from President Trump himself and his campaign, okay? And then they have their own timeline. And I just love this line: the Trump administration's decisive actions to combat the coronavirus. Very enlightening, right? So I got 3 timelines that we're going to look at. And we're just going to follow them and see exactly the detail that was involved in putting this together to see how things rolled out, right? But in regards to decisive actions, we got to remember there were three very important decisive actions that took place just prior to this whole pandemic, right? First, we have the U.S. pandemic response team created by President Obama in 2016. That's one decision. The next one, the CDC's China-based expert on pandemic response and containment. That's two. And then there is the U.S. Intelligence Agency report warnings of the pandemic threat in January 2020. Now, with each of these decisive decisions, what were they again? Well, the response team that Obama created was disbanded by President Trump. Decisive action. Whoosh. The next one, the China-based expert on pandemic response and containment, fired by President Trump. Whoosh. Decisive actions, right? Pretty much good to be proud of, right? And then the U.S. Intelligence Agency reports warning of a pandemic threat in January, ignored by President Trump. So, as we get started, these are three very important bullet points to remember as we move forward. And then what we're going to do is that there will be a section where I'm going to judge by the actions on, is this a triggering event that could be applied to the playbook, and see where along the playbook that this could have happened. Now, like I said, I'm not in the government. All I know is that I'm just an everyday Joe. And just by looking at certain things, you would use common sense to say, hey, you know what? I think this is where this would fit in. Or this may be something that this should have taken care of right here. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to list with the various columns on exactly who said what, who did what, at what date. And then we're going to use the playbook's triggering events to show where exactly that could have taken place here. Okay? Now, we're going to start on December 30th, 2019. Okay? Now, this would have been a point in time where everything would be considered normal, right? Right. Everything is okay in the world from what we can see, right? So, on December 30th, 2019 would be 1A, where normal operations is handling and no specific threats. But then, on December 31st, 2019, this is when the Chinese authorities treated dozens of cases of pneumonia of an unknown cause, okay? According to MSNBC, Associated Press became one of the first English language news accounts to report that China is investigating an outbreak of a respiratory illness in the central city of Wuhan. Now, on the Trump timeline, on December 31st, China reports the discovery of a coronavirus to the World Health Organization. Now, according to the playbook, okay, this would be a triggering event, right? So this will take us from 1A to 1B. It'll go to a rating from normal operations to an elevated threat, right? And a triggering event, identification of a human case of high consequence emerging infectious disease anywhere. And the epidemiology indicator, identification of a human case of pathogen of pandemic potential. Okay? Potential. So that means it's giving us something to look at. Now, the next day, January 1st is New Year's Day, so everybody probably was out drinking for the weekend and for the holidays and stuff, so they didn't do anything, and they probably took the second off because usually, some people do. But on January 3rd, 2020, on Friday, Trump administration's decisive action to combat the coronavirus CDC Director Robert Renfield sent an email to the Director of Chinese CDC, George Yao, formally offering to send U.S. experts to China to investigate the coronavirus. Now, since this is a triggering event, what if a call was made and not an email sent? Okay? Because if the Chinese director is handling this issue, maybe he's not near his computer. Maybe he doesn't have his cell phone in hand, so he couldn't get any emails. Or maybe his receptionist wasn't able to get in touch with him because she probably checks his email, because a lot of receptionists or assistants do. So if you made a call first, then you probably be talking to somebody else. But an email sent on a Friday, we don't know if the email went to the guy's spam. Did he get it? Did he respond to it? We don't know. But what if that a call was made and not an email? And what if there still was a Chinese-based expert in China? So we wouldn't even have to send the email, because all we had to do was call the person that was already there, right? Because reports indicate they waited a couple of weeks before the notification, right? The CDC China-based staff member would have already been there to deal with some things before even this notification went. Because he would have been talking to them, because he would have realized, or he would have got an early heads up that something was happening. And the Chinese doctor from Wuhan that was in charge of this, he probably would have been talking to them, right? He would probably have been talking to this gentleman, so that he would have had an inside thing on it, right? So he would have known. And then perhaps communication before this notification would have already been had. And then we would have had more insight into this situation before it got to January 3rd. All right. So on Friday, Trump administration's decisive action was sending an email to see if we can send anybody there. Now, on the 5th of January, which is Sunday, the director sent another email to China. Okay? Sent another email because he probably didn't get a response. Hey, listen, we can help you out. Do you want us to send somebody? Let me know so we can move on this. But remember, there would have probably been more follow-up if that person was already in China doing this, right? So, January 6th. Center of Disease Control and Prevention warns America to take precautions if traveling to China. Okay? January 6th for the Trumps. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention issued a travel notice to Wuhan, China, due to the spread of coronavirus. So it's basically watch how you do, watch where you're going, be careful, just be on the lookout because something is happening, right? The 7th. The CDC's Emergency Operations Center activates its COVID-19 incident management system used to direct operations, deliver resources, and share information. Now, if there was someone in China already working on this, that communication wouldn't have been ongoing. You wouldn't have to set it up because that gentleman or person would have already been there. Next one on the 8th. CDC issues an alert about coronavirus, saying it's closely monitoring the disease and that there are no known U.S. cases. Now, what if the playbook was triggered? What if they reached out to the airline carriers, right? Reached out so that they can notify their customers that, hey, this is an emergency travel notice that we were sent. Please be mindful that to check with your physician. If you have any health issues, let us know. Put the feelers out there. Track and trace things that they've been talking about. This could have been a triggering moment for us to actually get into doing this. Because while the numbers traveling into the country were low, we could have been checking this out all along since the 8th of January. It could have been, right? It could have been something to look into. Now, on the 9th, Trump had a campaign rally, all right? And then maybe if he had this information, he likes to spill the beans on things. So he could have just been, telling America then, well, we're talking with China. There's a problem, but we're handling it. We're doing something about it. That could have been a part of the rally, because I'm sure that, he spent his time, shooting his mouth on how the, Democrats are trying to upend everything and the world is coming to an end because they're doing it and they're just trying to get rid of me. But him doing something behind, he could have been saying this to say, hey, listen, we're on, and we're going to handle this. We're taking care of this, right? So by the 11th of January, China reported its first deaths. And Trump administration reaction, the CDC issued a level 1 travel health notice to Wuhan, China. Still, this could be something that they're still doing follow-up with the person that we have based in there, if he was still there, if they were still there. So, next bullet point, on the 14th of January, the World Health Organization issues a statement about the first COVID-19 case operating notified outside of China. Now, there is no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission. Now, if you had the person in China, person-to-person spread, well, you kind of would think that's already happened, since how many people got it, right? Already. So, if the individual was still in China working on that end, that information could have already been there with the United States. And then when the CDC and the National Security Council already meet, they could have been communication with that person in China. And it could have also been dealing with the pandemic team that's already in the White House that Obama had, right? He had a team already in the White House next to the president, and they could have all been triangulating and talking together at that point, sharing this information, right? Based on what's needed. Answering the questions in the playbook to say, hey, this is happening. This is what should we do? Yes, there's a yes to this question. What should we do? Right? So it could be scaling up from then. Now, what if they President met with the House and Senate leaders and let them know what was going on at that point, to give them the heads up? And just let him know that we're looking out for this. So if there's anything that he may need from Congress, they hopefully will be ready to deal with it. And then next, maybe on the 16th, at this point, he would meet with the governors and discuss how to prepare. All right? Be on the lookout, right? Just to be on the safe side, why don't you check in with your different agencies to see how prepared they are. If they have medical equipment, and to see if there's anything that they're missing. Now that could have been something that they could have been dealing with, right? Checking. It's all about planning, right? The response network, right? The old national framework. Prepare, so that we can deal with it. Next, COVID holds on the 17th. The CDC hold its first COVID-19 telebriefing. Officials say that the agency will start screening passengers to direct or screening passengers on direct or connecting flights from Wuhan. However, they said that they are not aware of measures regarding existing screenings in Wuhan. On the 17th, the CDC began implementing public health entry screenings in the U.S. airports that received the most travelers from Wuhan, San Francisco, New York, JFK, and Los Angeles. Now, understanding that on the 16th, the impeachment hearings began, right? So, with that happening, that maybe we could have sidestepped Congress at that point so that they, let them know that, hey, we're handling the situation. But also that while that's happening, that wouldn't prevent Trump from dealing with this really head on. And if they were following the playbook, these measures, these triggering events would have been something that they would have been working on. And even though he may have been, in the midst of an impeachment, other organizations weren't dealing with it. They could have been handling this situation, giving him his reports. And before 12 o'clock, right, 10 o'clock every day, he could have met with House leaders around 8 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, listen, I'm just giving you a heads up so you know how we're going. So that, just to make sure you know what the deal is and, you know what's happening. Even though you're trying to get rid of me, I'm still doing my job. So, we'll just deal with that, okay? So, on January 18th, well, what did he do? He went golfing. All right? He went golfing. And what if the CDC at this point, what if the CDC at this point recommend that Americans begin to wear face mask coverings, right? Mask as a precaution because this is a respiratory transmitted transmission. It's a plan, right? It's something to put into place, something to show that, yeah, we're thinking on this, we're moving forward, we're trying new avenues to make sure that we're okay. Just maybe if you wear a suggestion mask to help, because I don't know of you, but I've seen people wearing masks before. They were a lot of Chinese Americans that are out there wearing a mask before this. You've seen it. I had friends that had them. So it's not a crazy thing to think about as a precaution. We're not taking any message, but we think that, it'll probably be a good idea for us to do it. So on the 18th and 19th, he went golfing. Yeah, it's kind of busy, just, being impeached and everything, so I need to, go golfing. Yeah, that'll help me out a lot. Now, on January 20th, something happened. Other countries, including the United States, confirmed cases. Okay, it's kind of an event happened, right? Dr. Fauci announces National Institute of Health is already working on development of a vaccine for the coronavirus. You're already working on a vaccine on January 20th. So that must mean that we're pretty much real serious on this, right? So now that we have multiple locations with this, the triggering event takes us to 1C, right? Making it a rating of a credible threat. And this here is a triggering event. Confirmation of multiple human cases of a PPP anywhere. Determination of a significant potential for a public health emergency. So now we're confirmation of multiple human cases. Now, this too could have been upgraded maybe a week or two ago when you found out that there were a dozen cases in China. You could have moved that up too, right? But since now we've got confirmed here in the United States, we're now at 1C. We're at a credible threat. Okay? So, as we continue on, maybe now he would talk to the governors again and determine their needs, right? Governors, I need you to check what are the answers to your resource issues? Do you have them? Do you need them? What do you got to do, right? And this here on the 21st, it says the CDC activated its Emergency Operations Center to provide ongoing support to the coronavirus response. Right? That's good. That shows that they're looking to do something. They're trying something, right? People are starting to work, right? On the 22nd, while the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, President Trump is asked whether he has a plan to contain the coronavirus in the United States. And Trump responds by saying that the U.S. does have a plan and that he thinks it's going to be handled very well. And he also said that he thinks China is in very good shape. Now, with that being said, meeting with the House leaders again, Yeah, I know you guys got the impeachment going on. Let's have an 8 o'clock conference call. Hey, listen, this is what's going on. This is what we got. Please keep this on the back burner. Just let you know that we may have to deal with something very soon. Okay? 23rd, Wuhan, city of more than 11 million people, was cut off by the Chinese authorities. So they started their shutdown process then. All right? 23rd, the CDC sought a special emergency authorization from the FDA to allow states to use its newly developed coronavirus test. Now, I believe this is the test they found out that it wasn't working right. So it was giving them a lot of errors. So this is something to really consider. Now, at this point, the president could enact a Defense Production Act at this time to ramp up production of supplies needed, PPEs, and various companies, right? With various companies. So at this point, we could go into the protective clothing, swabs, anything that we need for testing, because you want the states to use the testings, right? So they need the swabs and everything, so that we can get the resources and the supplies up, so the states would have it in hand so they can deal with these situations. So, next up, on January 27th, Donald Trump says, we are in very close communications with China concerning the virus. Very few cases reported in the U.S., but strongly on watch. We have offered China and the President Xi any help that is necessary. Our experts are extraordinary. All right? So, he's letting them know that, hey, we can send people over. We can do what we got to do to help you. But if he already had somebody in China already, that would have been already established. And all you had to do was send additional personnel to do what they got to do in order to keep that there. And also by now we would have the airlines, they would have been reporting out that, hey, listen, these many people are telling us that they're not feeling well, and we've got some issues that we need to be concerned about. These tests, these individuals, do you want us to test them first, right? So that way, because they traveled from another country, not all of them lived, they're in the international cities where they have international airports, and we could have been looking at those areas back in January. All right, so we could have seen a lot better on what is happening at this point, right? So as we continue on, they issued a level 3 travel health notice urging Americans to avoid all non-essential travel to China due to the coronavirus. White House task force started a meeting to help monitor and contain the spread of the virus and provide updates to the president. Now, on the 28th, he had a campaign rally. I wonder how much was really talked about that then. On the 29th, the White House announced the formation of the coronavirus task force to help monitor and contain the spread of the virus and provide updates to the president. President Trump announced what he said. The United States government response to the novel 2019 coronavirus they're keeping him apprised of developments. The White House said that the task force was being led by Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar. Now, January 30th. The World Health Organization declared a global health emergency, right? The New York City Fire Department instructs 911 dispatchers on special procedures to follow if a caller presents coronavirus-like symptoms, including a fever and a cough. Now, Trump says, this is decisive action on the 30th from the organization. Trump is discussing U.S.-Mexico agreement at Dana Incorporated in Warren, Washington. He says, now we're working very closely with China on the coronavirus. That's a new thing that a lot of people are talking about. Hopefully it won't be as bad as some people think it would be. Interesting. Now, on the 31st of January, the Trump administration restricted travel from China, okay? And it says here, the Trump administration suspends entry into the United States by foreign nationals who travel to China. Now, this is his great China ban, travel ban within the last 14 days, including Hong Kong and Moscow. This does not apply to lawful U.S. residents and family members and spouses. And Al-Azhar declares a U.S. public health emergency for COVID-19. Public health emergency now, right? Very serious, right? Now, if we issue a public health emergency, that means this takes us to 2A phase, right? 2A. And this rating is the initial response activation, situational assessment, and movement. And this goes to a triggering event, demonstration of efficient and sustained human-to-human transmissions of a novel virus anywhere, and or declaration of a public health emergency. And the key epidemic indicators, demonstration of efficient and sustained human-to-human transmission. That is very important. Because the things that they could have been doing before this, if they were following the playbook, and if they were very interested in ensuring that the U.S. is safe in all of this, there were some actions that really could have been taking place before they got to that point. And you got to wonder, were they really following a plan or were they winging it? And the way things are looking, of what they were doing, you would think that they were just winging it. But you got to say to yourself, but how is that even possible? Well, it's very evident. Because even during this time, governors pleaded for medical equipment from the federal stockpile, plagued by shortages and confusion, right? Preparation. We need help. We need you to send us this so that we can do that. And even there's in Trump's interactions with the governors. You know, Trump went on television and warned governors. It's a two-way street. They have to treat us well, suggesting that if governors criticize his coronavirus response, their citizens may suffer, right? He declared states of emergencies in New York and Washington State and California, but then didn't release disaster unemployment funds to them. He connected his reluctance to issue a disaster declaration in Michigan to the fact that it's a new Democratic governor and she has not been pleasant. He called the governor of Washington a snake and admitted to imposing punitive policies to New Yorkers because the state continues to criminally investigate him and his business. His administration has shown more salacious to some states, Florida than others, right? He has provided New York but a fraction of needed ventilators from the strategic reserve. White House aides say it's understood that governors who say nice things about the federal response are more likely to be spared public criticism from the White House or threats of withholding assistance. And then the great response from Kirshner. The notion of the federal stockpile is supposed to be our stockpile. It's not supposed to be states' stockpiles that they then use. Well, this is the United States of America, right? The states are right? They are part of the United States of America. The federal government, yes, runs the country, but their role is to protect the country, right? That's their role, is to protect the country. The states govern their respected areas. And if you ask the federal government, hey, this is what we need to help, should they not help? Should they not give them what they needed? Because realistically, before all this was coming down in the month of January, all of this that's coming out of China and all the events that happened prior to that, shouldn't they have been actively engaging with China and other countries to make sure that they kept it over there to the best of their ability. And then coming in here, notify governors and everyone else that, hey, listen, you need to be on the lookout for this. This is what we're looking at so as to, keep this thing at bay. What would have been wrong in that? And the notion of that we won't help you unless you say nice things about the president. Well, it's not about the president, is it? It's about the people in the country. It's about taking care of our own, making America, right? Protecting America, America first, right? Well, for America first, you protect the people by keeping what's attacking it out. That's what the United States, that happens to have been the very best thing about the country, was that we work to keep things outside its borders. We handle everything across the sea so that it would not touch us. But now that we have it here, the thought that we need to send resources to their states should have been a no-brainer. It shouldn't be questioned. It shouldn't be conditionalized. It should have been something that was automatic, a knee-jerk reaction, as you will. Something is incoming. A parent to a child. You see something coming at it. You see glass falling on top of your child. Do you just sit there and say, hey, wing it, cover yourself up? Or as a parent, do you jump on top of them and protect them? There's something not right here. And as Rachel Maddow always said, watch what they do, not what they say. Watch what they do and not what they say. Because the public-private partnership is the key to what Donald Trump does. And you've heard him. He projects that in every news conference, that public-private partnership, public-private partnership. And then he would have the display, right? Even on March 13th, he had the list of executives, parading them across the stage like it was the Miss America pageant, right? Walmart, Target, Beacon, Dickinson and Company, Quest Diagnostics, North America, Roche Diagnostics, Significant Health. It was like an infomercial that he was giving out on stage. Hey, these are the people that's going to, help, right? And we've discussed before in the infrastructure thing, the plan for the national framework response, right? Public-private partnerships, yes, we've discussed that, but there was a different tone to this. It was really like he was having an infomercial on stage, which goes to the framework for 2019. Now, this framework, this fourth edition, took place in October, the new edition, October 2019. These are the changes the Trump administration did to the framework. Now, under roles and responsibilities for response, right? This section describes those roles and responsibilities and sharpens the focus on identifying who's involved with the response mission area. This section also addresses that the various partners must do to deliver the response core capabilities and to integrate successfully with the prevention, protection, mitigation, and recovery missions. An effective, unified national response requires layered, mutually supporting capabilities. Individuals and communities, the private sector, NGOs, and all level of government local, state, tribal, territorial, insular area, and federal, should each understand their respective roles and responsibilities and how to complement each other in achieving shared goals. All elements of the whole community plays roles in developing the core capabilities needed to respond to incidents. This incident includes developing plans that ensure continuity of operations, conducting assessments and exercises, providing and directing resources and capabilities, and gathering lessons learned. These activities require that all partners understand how they fit within and are supported by the structures described in an NRF. Emergency management staff in all jurisdictions and organizations have a fundamental responsibility to consider the needs of the whole community. These needs must be incorporated into response planning and delivery of the core capabilities. The potential contributions of all individuals toward delivering core capabilities during incident response through associations and alliances that serve the people previously identified should be incorporated into the planning efforts. Now, that sounds good, right? As a community, we all share in taking care of where we live. That's a given, right? We all play a role, right? In the private sector organizations engage in incident response through their own internal response and continuity actions, continuity actions, the commodities they provide, their partnerships with each level of government, and their roles within the supply chain. Remember, supply chain is something that he likes to put out there. Elements of the private sector are most often the providers of community lifeline services and have a key interest in the stabilization and restoration of their own operations and those of other infrastructure systems. Private sector organizations also play a vital role in ensuring communities and survivors have the services and resources necessary to respond and to recover from all types of incidents. The private sector, comprised of small, medium, and large businesses, span nationally significant infrastructure to locally owned and operated businesses that, while small, are staples of the community. The private sector includes commerce, healthcare, private, cultural, educational institutions, and industry, as well as public-private partnerships that have been established specifically for emergency management purposes. During an incident, key private sector partners should have a direct link to emergency managers and other relevant officials, such as those from public health, community development, and community planning agencies, and in some cases be involved in the decision-making process. Now that's a big difference. Be involved in the decision-making process. Strong integration into response efforts can offer many benefits to the public-private sectors. Okay? So, this is pretty much strengthening the response of the private sector in regards to emergencies. Remember, Trump paraded these companies at the White House in front of America, saying that these guys basically are going to save us. Never happened before, right? Never happened before. To continue, let's go. Private sector entities may serve as partners in local, state, tribal, territorial, and insular area emergency preparedness and response organizations and activities. And with federal sector-specific agencies, private sector entities often participate in local, state, tribal, and insular area preparedness activities by providing resources, donated or compensated. Okay? Nothing's for free in this country. During an incident, including specialized teams, essential services, equipment, and advanced technology, through local public-private emergency plans or mutual aid and assistance agreements, or in response to requests from government and non-governmental initiatives. Restoring economic activity in an impacted area is fundamental to the recovery of the community And examples of key private sector activities that support this effort include the following: planning, training, and exercising their responsive capabilities, planning for responding and recovering from incidents that impact their own infrastructure and facilities, protecting information and maintaining the continuity of business operations in order to ensure the integrity of supply chains, and quickly establishing new supply chains to stabilize the community and reduce human suffering. Provide assistance specified under mutual aid and assistance agreements, addressing the welfare of employees, including disbursement of wages, executing their own immediate response activities and meeting the continuity needs of infrastructure, facilities, and business operations, collaborating with emergency management personnel to determine what assistance may be required and how they can provide needed support, contributing to communications and information sharing efforts during incidents, and providing insight on the scope and scale of impacts, identifying requirements of private sector support to enable stabilization of critical community lifelines, and contributing resources, personnel, and expertise, helping to shape objectives and receiving information about the status of the community. So this is pretty much engaging the private sector to an increased level of importance, putting it out there on the same level as your governors, right? Your city managers, right? We understand that the private sector, they do. Light, heat, power. Walmart, they have a distribution network that benefits the health. We understand that. But as a resource to help, this here is pretty much engaging them on a level of equality to our government officials by looking at this. And in doing so, this pretty much makes the federal government not the first line of resources for the states. So that means state governments must first go to private sector to purchase services. Purchase services, right? Remember that line in there about, being paid. The federal government will only offer assistance if must. And then who establishes a national emergency at that point? Now, the role of the federal government at this point, what would that be? The federal government maintains a wide range of capabilities and resources that may be required to deal with domestic incidents in order to save lives and protect property and the environment, while ensuring the protection of privacy, civil rights, civil liberties, and supporting the stabilization of community lifelines. To be successful, any approach to the delivery of response capabilities will require an all-of-nation approach. All federal departments and agencies must cooperate with one another and with local, state, tribal, territorial, and insular area governments, community members, voluntary organization, and the private sector for the maximum extent possible. The federal government becomes involved with a response when federal interests are involved. When state, local, tribal, territorial, and insular resources are insufficient and the federal assistance is requested, or as authorized or required by statute, regulation, or policy. Accordingly, in some incidents, the federal government may play a supporting role. Supporting role. You see that? Private sector engagement's been put on head-to-head role with the governors, right? Private sector gets a step up. Federal government gets pretty much a demotion. Supporting role. Why would that be? Why would the federal government needs to be in a supporting role? I just don't understand that. But it goes to show that in that line in losing the faith of government resources back then under Trump's pillars, right? I don't know. I just don't know. Because in seeing this, you got to wonder if our safety will be only at the behest of a dollar bill. Because businesses don't do anything if it costs them, right? If you pay us, we'll do it. If you pay us, we'll do it. Some companies will be generous about their activities, but then you got to look at a lot of others. But the federal government may play a supporting role to the local, state, tribal, territorial, and insular area authorities by providing federal assistance to the affected parties. That shouldn't be if you need it. It should be, as always been, this is what we have for you. Do you want it? We know what you need. We have it for you to have. And as an example, the federal government provides assistance to local, tribal, territorial, insular area authorities when the president declares a major disaster or emergency under the Stafford Act. In other instances, the federal government may play a leading role in which response where the federal government has primary jurisdiction or when incidents occur on federal property. Now, this is also a thing with the Stafford Act in President Trump. He says in his conferences, right? I'll do it, but I really don't want to do it. I really want to do it. I really don't want to do it. I think I can do it, but I really don't want to. Because he doesn't want to commit the federal government to doing anything. And by not committing the federal government, he's ensuring that the states go to the private sector to handle these things. Now, in doing so, what are you ensuring? State coffers emptying out because you got to pay for the services of the private industry because they don't offer it for free. Right? Money. Private sector engagement. Let's make money. So that's the plan, right? Let's pull the federal government out of the way so that the states have to pay the companies to take care of them. But what I just don't understand in just reading this, and this is what troubles me about the federal government, people pay taxes to the federal government. That's our money. So it shouldn't be an option on whether or not the federal government will respond to anything that happens to us. It's not about overreaching. It's about responding. The federal government shouldn't be just option B. They are our go-to when we need something. We don't go to war by states if there's an issue with another country. The federal government's response is to protect the United States from enemies foreign and domestic. And right now, this coronavirus is a domestic enemy. There is no second guessing that. And him and his terminology that we're at war, yeah, okay, you want to do the war? Doctors and nurses are fighting this war for us in helping us live. Shouldn't the federal government be doing that too? So regardless of the type of the incident, the president leads the federal government response effort to ensure that the necessary resources are applied quickly and efficiently to large-scale and catastrophic incidents. Different federal departments and agencies lead coordination of the federal government's response, depending on the type and magnitude of the incident, and are also supported by other agencies that during their relevant capabilities to bear in responding to the incident. Another point. For large disasters such as major hurricanes and earthquakes, the incident complexity is increased as others, such as states and tribes, and ultimately the federal government becomes involved. Why is it that the federal government comes involved after the fact? In thinking. States, go to the private sector and handle your business within the borders of your state. And if you need us, we might be there. We may be there to help you. I just don't get it. I get it. Each state, when they petition to the United States, to the federal government for a disaster declaration, and we understand that so that the federal resources can come in because it's all legalized stuff. And we understand that. But it shouldn't be, hey, we want a declaration of a disaster declaration. And it shouldn't be a response to, well, whether did you ask company A, B, or C to help you out first before you came to me? Is that the way it's supposed to be? Community lifelines are interdependent and vulnerable to cascading failures. For example, communications and electrical powers rely on each other to function. Severe damage to one will disrupt the other. Most lifelines also rely on complex supply chains. Water and wastewater services depend on resupply of the broad array of chemicals and, if power goes out, fuel for emergency generators. However, in a severe natural or human-caused incident, these supply chains themselves may be broken. Secondly, community lifeline stabilization relies on businesses and infrastructure owners and operators who have expertise in primary responsibilities for managing their systems and emergencies. Accordingly, the new doctrine and coordination mechanisms are needed to enable the private sector to play a larger, more comprehensive role in preparedness and response activities. Like I said, I know all companies, they have their emergency protocols and everything to handle their immediate areas of responsibilities for their employees and then for their buildings and stuff like that. But like I said, private sector level of engagement has been elevated that can be equal to the governor's leg to say, hey, I want you to do this. I need you to do this. At what price, Governor? This is the bill. Community lifelines provide a valuable decision-making construct to integrate cross-sector response operation and reporting. Each lifeline depends on multiple infrastructure sectors, business supply chains to function. Focusing on community lifelines allow emergency managers and their partners to account for these complex interdependencies and prioritize response operations to achieve high-impact multi-sector benefits. This framework describes how the resources and capabilities of the federal government support each operations, right? And then the framework's focus on community lifelines necessitates deeper collaboration with the private sector and non-governmental agencies. During the disasters of 2017-18, individual business and infrastructure owners and operators, including public-private sectors, forged innovative collaborative relationships with government agencies to help prioritize and accelerate the stabilization of community lifeline services. We get that. We get that there is a need for businesses and governments to work together. Okay? But it shouldn't be at the expense that the federal government does nothing. We get that. But for the federal government to sit back and drink lemonade with their feet kicked up while they see out there that there's something wrong, and wait for them to be asked, and then for the federal government to say to the states, did you ask company A, is not right. Is not right. So the federal support during response operations focuses on the capabilities necessary to save lives, protect property and an environment, meet basic human needs, prioritize operations to stabilize community lifelines and restore basic services and community functionality, establish a safe, secure, and accessible environment for responders, response operations, and support the transition of recovery. The desired end state for federal incident response is achieved when local, state, tribal, territorial, and insular areas entities no longer require federal government assistance to provide life-saving or life-sustaining support, thereby allowing for the transition to recovery. When the incident occurs that exceeds or is anticipated to exceed state, local, state, tribal, territorial, and insular area resources, and when an incident is managed by federal departments or agencies acting under their own authorities, the federal government may use the management structures described within the NRF. Additionally, the federal government may use supplementary and complementary plans to involve all necessary department and agency resources to organize the federal response and ensure coordination among all response partners. Different federal departments and agencies may play significant roles in response activities. Depending on the nature and size of the incident, many of the arrangements by which departments and agencies participate are defined in the ESF annexes, coordinated through prescript missions assignments in the Stratford Act response. Formalization of interagency agreements are described in the supplementary plans. The following sections, right, will go into and that's part of this whole national response framework. So the response is a tier response, right? And as stated before, most incidents begin and end locally and are managed and executed at the local tribal level. Incidents require a unified response from local agencies, the private sector, tribes, and NGOs. Some may require additional support from neighboring jurisdictions or state government. A smaller number of incidents require federal support. Incidents that occur within or along the borders of federally managed lands and state, tribal, territorial lands require unity of effort among federal, state, tribal, and territorial governments at the local level. National response process are structured to provide tiered level of support when additional resources and capabilities are needed. So we get it. Something happens on the street, okay, local city stuff can take place. And as it explodes or gets bigger, yes, you need more help. Okay, and then the United States and finally the federal government as a last resort will take place. But that's not what happened here with the pandemic. Because it wasn't something that's locally happened, right? It didn't start here. It started out there in China. The federal government should have been more actively engaged in making sure that what happened out there shouldn't have gotten here. The eyes should have been open. At no point during this pandemic should the plan be that the federal government giving you help will be the last resort. And that's basically what the revised National Response Framework does. When the situation happens in this country, the federal response is We're the last resort for you. Take care of what you need to take care of with your corporate partners. And if you can't get it that way, then we'll help you. Now, in engaging the reopening of the country, the president puts out the new 8-point plan to make sure we get there, right? Build a foundation for diagnostic testing, mobilization, the private sector to develop tests. Private sector to develop tests. Issue emergency use authorization for tests. Galvanize commercial and research laboratories and professional associations to ramp up testing capabilities. Facilitate state efforts to access and utilize all available testing capacities, right? And then stage 2, identify and expand public-private sector testing infrastructure, right? Strengthen testing supply chain. And then finally, coordinate with governors to support testing plans and rapid response programs. Everything is designed for the fact that the federal government not do much of anything. Everyone in the states are supposed to handle their business. Yep, we let the rocket fly over the head because we failed to see it on our radar, and it landed right in the middle, blowing everything up. So you take care of that, why don't you? So with that being the case, then who will lead? Something as simple as wearing a mask. Face mask to protect each other, right? Pence went to visit the hospital, right? He didn't have one. Everyone else in the room did. Why is he the exception? Who will lead? Why is he the exception? Who will lead? The federal government should be supporting us. If we're to wear masks to help contain the spread of this virus, then he needed to wear one too. It's not a question. It shouldn't have been, well, it doesn't go with my outfit. The image should have been that we are all in this together. Who will lead? Something as simple as bringing protective equipment to a nursing home. Well, I can carry the empty ones just for the cameras. So is everything a prop now? Is this activity a fake show? It's just Hollywood? We're just showing it for the cameras? I'm moving an empty box from a truck to the front door of a nursing home. I'm just doing it to show that the government is doing our part, which is supposedly absolutely nothing. It's an empty box. Empty promises. That's what that box pretty much represents, right? There's no substance in what we're doing. The box is empty. There's nothing in it. Who will lead? But the federal government, the Trump administration, decisive actions in regards to the Defense Production Act, right? The one tool to galvanize the workforce into making equipment so that we can be protected. World War II, they did it when they had to make planes, bombs, equipment, and everything. The car makers became tank builders and plane builders, right? But for the Defense Production Act, it was utilized an executive order on delegating authority under the DPA with respect to the food chain resources during the national emergency caused by the outbreak. First, that happened in a matter of days. Supply chain broken. They're not making pork. They're not making bacon. They're not making chicken? Uh-oh, I'm using the Defense Production Act to make sure that that doesn't happen. Boom, check, right? Governors, hey, we need PPEs, right? We need ventilators, right? We need help, right? Ventilators. Did we get one immediately when we needed that to happen? No. It was a battle. You don't really need it. We need ventilators. We don't really need it. I want to do that, but I don't think I should. Maybe I should do it, but I really don't want to. I want private sector to do it on the volition of, well, they're being patriotic. Corporate decisions aren't made on being patriotic. Corporate decisions are made on the fact that they can get $1 for it. Personal protective equipment. Did he really do that? No. Over and over, people are asked, hospital, nurses, this is what we need. But did he readily respond to it? No. But in, 2 days, 3 days, they're going to cut off my chicken? They're going to cut off my bacon? No, they're not. I'm invoking it now. The president's decisive actions. That's what they like to say. But guidance with the reopening of the country. Guidance. Everybody's looking for guidance, right? Everybody's looking for direction and hope that we can get out of this. Who can help us? The CDC, the premier federal organization that is there to do just that, put out guidelines to reopen childcares, guidelines for schools and day camps, guidelines for communities of faith, all right? They're talking about churches. We can't have church on Sunday. We got to get back to it. We'll defy any order the state governors do so that we can go to church. Guidance for employers for their vulnerable workers. Guidance for restaurants and bars. Guidance for mass transportation administrators. But what? The Trump administration rejects the CDC guidelines for reopening the U.S. Why? Because they're too harsh. Why don't you go back and not make them so demanding? Instead of saying, this is what you must do, say, well, you can do it if you want to. So now the guidelines are being re-looked at, being reviewed by the White House to see what will be changed, come back to them with something a lot less, permanent or structured or whatever. But that's what we look for the CDC for, right? That's what we look for them to do to protect us, right? We need these guidelines. We don't come out there ready to say that this is what we do. That's their skill set. That's what they do. That's what they do to set those guidelines for us. Because they think of the things that we don't normally think of. They put into place certain things that doesn't materialize. That's what they do. And lately, that's not what they've been doing. Why? Because like in the new National Response Net framework, they've been downgraded. Private sector upgraded, federal government downgraded. So who is going to protect us now? Well, if there's anything I know for sure, is that as a country, we will rise. We will stand. We will go to the light. The sun will always shine on us. And we will come together and we will defeat this. But the thought of us doing it alone, that's what scares us. Because we have a government that is supposed to be for the people, not protecting its people. I'd love to hear from you. Email me. Check me out on Twitter, Facebook. Let me know what you think. Because as a community, we just got to keep talking to each other and not at each other. This is Joseph Williams for Almost Daily View from the Border. Stay safe. Wash your hands. And for the love of God, please wear your mask. Take care of yourself.